the Sino-Soviet conflict. The central fact of the world communist movement today is the bitter, vociferous internal conflict raging within world communism. This conflict is between the communists of China and the communists of Russia, and the communists of the entire world are aligning themselves behind one or the other of these groups. What is the argument all about? What is the nature of this conflict? Fundamentally, the argument is concerning the best way in which to consummate the communist objective of world conquest. And the bitterness of the argument is an indication of the devotion of all communists to this objective, seeing that they all believe very strongly in the objective of world communist conquest, and they believe that the methods advocated by their adversaries will defeat this purpose. They are naturally very indignant. There is a great deal on which all communists are agreed. They are agreed, for example, on the basic strategy of world conquest, which is expressed by the formula external encirclement plus internal demoralization equals progressive surrender. The communists of Russia and China are convinced that the method of violent revolution is necessary to establish communist power in the encircling countries, the countries of Southeast Asia, Asia generally, Africa, and South America, Central America. The disagreement is concerning the processes which are most likely to produce the conditions within Western Europe and the United States that will result in surrender. The Russian communists are very well aware of the hideous power of thermonuclear weapons. They believe that the program of conquest must be so designed that the danger of thermonuclear war is reduced to an absolute minimum. They believe that world conquest can be consummated without the threat of thermonuclear war. On the other hand, the Chinese communists are not so concerned about thermonuclear war. They believe that it can be avoided even if violent revolutions take place in the countries of Western Europe and North America. The basic strategy of conquest by conquering the underdeveloped countries first and using them to encircle the industrialized countries of the West has been the communist policy for many years. Often I've been challenged to give the source from which I secured the formula external encirclement plus internal demoralization equals progressive surrender, and I always found difficulty because it was the result of reading a vast quantity of communist literature, analyzing their programs and condensing and summarizing their strategy into this formula. Now, however, the formula has been filled out in detail by the Chinese Communist spokesman, Lin Piao, who is the vice chairman of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China and National Defense Minister. An article written by him appeared in Peking Review recently, and it outlined this communist strategy very clearly. Lin Piao is dealing with the strategy of People's War, which was developed by the Chinese communist leader, Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong developed the concept that when you want to conquer a country, to begin with, you ignore the cities. You begin in the backward rural areas. You attack an isolated police post and seize the weapons. Then you terrorize the people in the surrounding countryside and maybe bribe them by distributing land to them. You establish your base within the rural areas. As you enlarge the area of the countryside under individual control, you infiltrate and demoralize the cities, but you don't attack them. At a certain point in this process, the cities are encircled. They're cut off from the countryside. They're economically strangulated, and finally, they collapse without a battle to the encircling forces. This was the strategy developed by Mao Zedong and resulted in the communist conquest of China. It was the strategy that was used for the communist conquest of Cuba. And the Chinese communists believe that it is the strategy that can be applied throughout the entire world. Lin Piao writes, quote, "It must be emphasized that Comrade Mao Zedong's theory of the establishment of rural revolutionary base areas and the encirclement of the cities from the countryside is of outstanding and universal practical importance for the present revolutionary struggles of all the oppressed nations and peoples, and particularly for the revolutionary struggles of the oppressed nations and peoples in Asia, Africa, and Latin America against imperialism and its lackeys," end quote. Having established the effectiveness of this method within a country, he proceeds to enlarge it into a global strategy of conquest. His words are most significant, quote, "Taking the entire globe, if North America and Western Europe can be called, quote, the cities of the world, then Asia, Africa, and Latin America constitute, quote, the rural areas of the world. Since World War II, the proletarian revolutionary movement has, for various reasons, been temporarily held back in the North American and West European capitalist countries, while the people's revolutionary movement in Asia, Africa, and Latin America has been growing vigorously. In a sense, the contemporary world revolution also presents a picture of the encirclement of cities by the rural areas. In the final analysis, the whole cause of world revolution hinges on the revolutionary struggles of the Asian, African, and Latin American peoples who make up the overwhelming majority of the world's population. So all communists, the Chinese communists and the Russian communists, are agreed on the basic strategy of encirclement by the conquest of the underdeveloped countries of the world. The argument comes concerning the correct strategy to be followed in the developed countries of Western Europe and North America. The Chinese communists cling to the established Marxist-Leninist technique of violent revolution. They believe that the Communist Party in each country has the task of stimulating the masses to revolt against the established government authority so that they overthrow it with violence and establish a communist dictatorship. They observe the large communist parties of Europe, particularly those in France and Italy. They observe that these communist parties are not engaged in the promotion of violent revolution. They say this is betrayal of true Marxist-Leninist doctrine and methods, and the forsaking of the pathway of violent revolution for peaceful infiltration they call revisionism. These countries are following the policy of the Russian communists. And the Russian communists believe that violent revolution is undesirable in these countries for a number of reasons. One reason is it may promote thermonuclear war. They believe there is a much more effective method of bringing about communist power in these countries than violent revolution. So they are urging the communists of France, Italy, and Greece to announce that they have renounced violence, to profess dedication to democratic principles, and they are urging them to seek a partnership with the non-communist left-wing parties, such as the socialists and the other radical groups, with the objective of establishing a popular front government in these countries. If they can establish a popular front government in France, Italy, and Greece, they believe that they will be able to take these countries out of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, or NATO, and NATO will be dead. They believe that these countries will then adopt a neutralist foreign policy and reorient their trade towards the Soviet Union, that these countries will cease to be allies of the United States. Western Germany will now be isolated and surrounded by countries favourable to the Soviet Union, and it will be forced to come to some sort of agreement and be neutralised. This will result in the neutralisation of Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, the isolation of the United States as America is stripped of all her allies and left to face alone the combined might of the communist world. This strategy has renounced individual violent revolution leading to seizure of power in each country. Because they've done this, the Chinese communists accuse them of being revisionist and being false to Marxism-Leninism, whereas the Russian communists accuse the Chinese communists of being doctrinairist because they don't understand the Leninist principle of flexibly adapting your program to changing situations. If either program, that of the Russian communists or the Chinese communists, succeeds, freedom dies. If you desire a printed copy of these messages, write to Dr. Fred Schwarz, Post Office Box 890, Long Beach, California, zip code 90801.